I rescued a giant Apache girl. Then her chiefs arrived with a decision that shook my life. It was a bright morning when he decided to leave the small town behind and venture into the rugged canyons that lay beyond the familiar paths. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of pine and dry earth, and the sound of distant birds filled the sky. He had always loved exploring, but this journey felt different. There was a quiet tension in the wind, a feeling that something unusual was waiting to be discovered. He walked carefully, his boots crunching against the stones, keeping his eyes on the rocky ground while also scanning the tall cliffs around him. The canyon was a place of beauty, but also of danger. Loose rocks, narrow paths, and sudden drops made every step a test of caution. As he rounded a bend in the trail, a strange sound caught his attention. At first it was so soft that he thought it might be the wind moving through the rocks, but then he realized it was something else, something that sounded like a small voice, crying for help. He froze for a moment, unsure if he should investigate, but his curiosity and concern overcame any fear. Someone might be hurt, he thought. Carefully he moved toward the sound, stepping lightly over loose stones and keeping close to the canyon wall. The cries grew clearer, and he followed them until he reached a narrow crevice partially hidden by boulders and thick brush. There, he saw a sight that made him catch his breath. A girl, tall for her age and dressed in simple traditional clothing, was trapped under a fallen tree limb. Her face was streaked with dirt, and her eyes were wide with fear. She struggled against the branch, but it was heavy, and she could not free herself. He could see the pain in her eyes and the exhaustion in her small frame. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees beside her, assessing the situation. "Don't worry," he said gently, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I'm here to help." "Can you move a little?" The girl hesitated, her eyes darting around as if checking for danger. She didn't speak, but her fear was clear. He realized that she might not trust him at first. Many people in remote communities were cautious of strangers, and he understood that. He stayed patient, speaking softly, explaining what he was doing as he worked. He looked for a way to lift the branch without hurting her, carefully wedging his hands under it and using the leverage of a smaller rock to shift it slightly. It took time, and he had to pause often, checking that she was okay. Finally, with one careful push, the branch moved enough for the girl to crawl out from underneath. She fell to the ground, gasping and rubbing her arms. He helped her sit up, keeping a respectful distance so she didn't feel threatened. "You're safe now," he said. "My name is Daniel," he added, hoping that introducing himself would make her feel less alone. The girl stared at him, wary but curious. She did not speak, but slowly she nodded. He noticed her striking features, the height, her alert eyes, and a strength that seemed unusual for someone her age. Despite her fear, there was a sense of resilience in her, a quiet determination that impressed him. He realized that she must have been through hardships even before this accident, and that made him even more determined to help her. Daniel looked around and saw that the canyon was vast and remote. There were no trails nearby, no signs of other people. They were alone, just the two of them, surrounded by cliffs and the distant sound of rushing water. He knew he had to act carefully, not only to help her recover, but also to make sure they both remained safe in this wild place. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, testing her strength, then slowly rose to her feet. He was taller than he expected, and despite the scratches and dirt, she carried herself with dignity and grace. He offered her water from his canteen, which she accepted cautiously. She drank slowly, then nodded in appreciation. He smiled softly, realizing that this small gesture had begun to build trust between them. "We should move to a safer spot," he suggested. "Somewhere flat where you can rest." She didn't answer with words, but she walked beside him, her movements careful and deliberate. He noticed that every step she took showed both caution and confidence, as if she knew the land better than he did, even though she had been trapped moments before. As they walked, he tried to speak with her again, asking simple questions, hoping to learn her name and where she came from. At first, she only shook her head or shrugged, clearly unsure of him. Daniel understood. Trust could not be forced. it had to be earned. So he shared little stories about his own life, speaking of small adventures and simple moments, hoping to show that he was not a threat. Slowly the girl began to relax, glancing at him occasionally, her eyes softening with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Hours passed and they found a small ledge with a flat surface where the girl could sit comfortably. Daniel set down his pack and made sure she was safe from any falling rocks or sharp stones. He prepared a small snack, offering it to her. She hesitated at first, then accepted it, taking small bites as she watched him carefully. They did not speak much, but a silent understanding began to grow between them. As the sun moved across the sky, Daniel noticed that the canyon's shadows were growing longer. The air was cooler now, and he realized they needed shelter before nightfall. He helped the girl find a spot beneath a rock overhang where they could stay dry and warm. He gathered some dry twigs and small branches, making a small fire that would keep them comfortable and visible in case someone came looking. The girl watched quietly, then mimicked some of his actions, helping him arrange the firewood. By the time evening arrived, they were sitting together near the small fire. The girl finally spoke her first words. Her name was Ayanna. Daniel repeated it gently, smiling, and she smiled back, a small but genuine expression of relief and trust. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the canyon, the distant rush of water, the whisper of wind through the rocks, and the soft calls of nocturnal birds. It was a peaceful moment, but Daniel knew it was only temporary. He did not know if her family would come looking or what challenges they might face in the coming days. Still, he felt a sense of purpose and connection he had never experienced before. He had found her when she was in danger, and now he had a responsibility to keep her safe until she could return to her community. That thought was both heavy and inspiring. He looked at Ayanna sitting quietly by the fire and realized that this moment would change both their lives forever. Night fell, and the stars appeared, sparkling above the canyon walls. Daniel kept watch, making sure the fire burned steadily and that Ayanna felt safe. She eventually leaned against a rock, her eyes closing as she rested. He stayed awake a little longer, thinking about how fate had brought them together in this remote place. The world felt vast and dangerous, yet at that moment it also felt full of possibility. This first encounter, filled with fear, courage, and cautious trust, had set the stage for something remarkable. Daniel knew that rescuing Ayanna was just the beginning. There were challenges ahead, lessons to be learned, and a bond forming that neither of them could have anticipated. And as he finally allowed himself to rest, he understood that this journey would not only be about survival, it would be about discovery, friendship, and the unexpected ways in which lives could be changed forever. The next morning, the canyon awoke with soft light that spilled across the cliffs, painting them in shades of gold and amber. Daniel was already awake, tending to the small fire and checking the surroundings. The night had been quiet, almost serene, except for the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. He glanced at Ayanna, who was still asleep, her face peaceful after the exhaustion of the previous day. Despite the hardship she had faced, there was a strength about her that struck him. Quiet, unwavering, and full of resilience. As she stretched and yawned, Daniel offered her some water and a small portion of the remaining food. Ayanna accepted cautiously, her eyes scanning him for any sign of danger or deceit. He smiled gently, speaking softly. "We need to keep moving today. There is a safer place further ahead where we can rest, and I want to make sure you stay out of harm's way." She nodded, her trust in him growing, if only slightly, as she prepared to follow his lead. They walked together through narrow passages, over rocky trails, and along the edges of steep cliffs. Daniel noticed that Ayanna's steps were careful but confident, almost as if she had a natural connection with the land. She pointed out small details he had missed, a loose rock that could cause a fall, a hidden patch of edible berries, even a shallow spring where the water was clean and safe. Daniel admired her alertness and intelligence, realizing that she was not only resourceful but also brave beyond her years. As they traveled, Daniel tried to engage her in conversation, asking questions in the simplest terms to make her feel comfortable. Slowly, Ayanna began to respond, first in short phrases, then in longer sentences. She spoke of her village, the traditions of her people, and the lessons she had learned from her elders. Though she had been separated from her community, her words carried the wisdom and knowledge of someone much older than her years. Daniel listened with fascination, feeling honored that she had chosen to share her story with him. They faced small challenges along the way. A sudden rock slide forced them to duck and find shelter, and a wild animal in the distance made them stop in their tracks, hearts pounding. Through it all, they relied on each other. Daniel used his experience and quick thinking to navigate the dangers, while Ayana's instincts and knowledge of the land guided them in subtle ways. Together they made a strong team, learning to anticipate each other's movements and needs. During a quiet break near a clear, sparkling stream, Ayana surprised Daniel by demonstrating skills he had not expected. She fashioned a simple tool from a nearby branch, using it to fish small creatures from the water. She moved with such precision and calm that Daniel could only watch in awe. He realized that she had learned these skills from her people, skills that allowed her to survive even in the harshest conditions. He felt a deep respect for her courage and ingenuity. As they continued their journey, the bond between them grew stronger. They shared small stories about themselves. Daniel spoke of his childhood in a nearby town, of the adventures he had dreamed about, and the lessons he had learned from mistakes along the way. Ayana listened intently, occasionally smiling or nodding, and in return she shared her own experiences. She spoke of her family, of the traditions she cherished, and of the moments that had shaped her into the person she had become. The more they shared, the more Daniel realized that their connection was rare, a meeting of two lives in a world where paths rarely crossed. By the middle of the day, the sun was high and the canyon walls reflected a warm, golden light. They found a small clearing that seemed safe, with soft grass and a few scattered rocks that could provide shelter if needed. Daniel suggested they rest for a while, allowing Ayana to regain her strength. As she sat beside him, she began to open up more, telling him about the importance of her people's chiefs and the lessons they had taught her about courage, respect, and community. Daniel listened closely, understanding that her words were not just stories. They were lessons she had learned through experience, lessons that had shaped her very being. The afternoon brought more challenges. A sudden rain shower made the rocks slippery, forcing them to move with extra caution. Ayana, despite her fear of slipping, guided Daniel towards safer paths, showing an understanding of the terrain that even he did not possess. He realized that she had an almost instinctive ability to read the land, to predict where dangers might lie, and to navigate through them with skill. It amazed him and deepened his admiration for her. As they moved through a narrow gorge, they encountered evidence that someone had been there before them. Footprints in the mud, a broken branch, and remnants of a small fire. Ayana paused, studying the signs carefully. "They are close," she whispered, her voice tense but steady. Daniel understood that she meant her people, the chiefs or villagers who might be searching for her. He felt a mixture of concern and relief. Concern because the approach of her community could bring unexpected challenges, and relief because it meant she was not completely alone. Despite the tension, the two of them continued to rely on each other. Daniel shared what little food they had, and Diana offered guidance on which plants could be eaten safely. They moved slowly, carefully, but with a sense of purpose. Along the way, Daniel noticed subtle changes in Ayana. Her fear was slowly giving way to trust. She would glance at him and offer small smiles, sometimes even making light jokes that made him laugh. It was a sign that their bond was growing deeper, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that they were each trying to help the other survive. As evening approached, they found a flat ledge overlooking a quiet valley. Daniel suggested they stay there for the night, knowing it would provide some safety and a good vantage point. Ayana helped him gather firewood, and together they made a small, controlled fire. The warmth and light were comforting, and for the first time, both of them felt a sense of peace after the long day. Sitting by the fire, they shared a simple meal. Ayana carefully portioned the food, showing thoughtfulness and care, while Daniel spoke about what the next day might bring. "We need to be ready for anything," he said gently, "but together, we can face it." She nodded, understanding the meaning behind his words. Though they had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, the connection they had formed gave them both courage. Night fell slowly over the canyon, and the stars began to twinkle above. Daniel and Ayanna sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the wild, the distant rustle of leaves, the soft call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the cliffs. In that moment there was no fear, no uncertainty, only the shared understanding that they had found a rare friendship in the middle of a vast, untamed world. They were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued. They had become companions, partners in survival. Before falling asleep, Daniel watched Ayanna carefully. He knew the next days would bring more challenges, and he wondered how her people would react to finding her. Yet he felt certain that their bond had created something powerful, something that would guide them through whatever was to come. Ayanna, exhausted but feeling safe for the first time in what seemed like forever, drifted into sleep beside the fire, and Daniel finally allowed himself a moment of rest. The canyon was quiet, the night deep, and the stars above reflected a sense of promise. The journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty was now unfolding into a story of trust, courage, and connection. Daniel knew that this was only the beginning, and that the bond he was forming with Ayanna would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the canyon was quieter than usual. The wind seemed softer, and even the birds were fewer in number. Daniel noticed the difference immediately. Something about the air felt heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He glanced at Ayanna, who was already awake, scanning the horizon with sharp, alert eyes. She had grown more confident in the last few days, moving with a purpose and an awareness that surprised Daniel. Yet there was a tension in her movements now, a subtle stiffness in her shoulders, a quick glance over her shoulder every few moments. "Something's wrong," she finally whispered, speaking more freely than she had in the past few days. "They are coming."
Daniel frowned, sensing the seriousness in her tone.
"Who's coming?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "The chiefs," she said. "My village leaders. They will come for me. I have been away too long, and they will want to see me. They will decide what happens next."
Her voice was steady, but carried a note of worry.
Daniel could see that the thought of facing them filled her with a mix of fear and hope, and he realized that this was a moment that could change everything for both of them. He looked around, considering the terrain. The canyon offered few hiding places, and they had been moving along well-worn trails. Footprints in the soft soil near the stream suggested that someone, or a group of people, had passed by recently. Daniel's heart quickened. He knew that her people would arrive soon, and he had no idea what to expect. He wanted to protect Ayanna, yet he also understood that respecting her culture and her family's authority was important. "Do you want me to stay with you?" he asked gently.
Ayanna nodded.
"Yes. But we must be careful. They are strong, and they will judge you before they trust you." Daniel took a deep breath, realizing the gravity of the situation. Up until now he had been her rescuer, her guide, and her protector. But soon they would face the authority of her people, the chiefs who held power and wisdom beyond his understanding. This moment required patience, respect, and courage, not just physical strength. They continued moving cautiously along the canyon trails, keeping their eyes on the distant cliffs and listening to the sounds of the land. Every snapping twig or rustling bush made them stop and look around. Ayanna occasionally crouched and examined the soil, noting footprints and broken branches, silently assessing whether they were close to the approaching group. Daniel marveled at her instincts. She was like a young eagle, aware of every movement around her, alert to dangers he might have missed entirely. As the sun climbed higher, the tension in the canyon increased. Daniel and Ayanna decided to rest near a small clearing that overlooked a wider part of the canyon. From this vantage point they could see the winding paths below, the scattered trees, and the rocky ledges that could provide shelter if needed. Ayanna crouched, her eyes scanning the valley. "They are near," she said. Her voice was calm but firm. "I can feel them. They will arrive before the sun touches the cliffs." Daniel looked at her, both impressed and concerned. "How do you know?" he asked. Ayanna shrugged slightly, but the seriousness in her eyes was undeniable. "We have ways," she said. "We can sense when they are close." "Ah, We know the land. We know the wind. We know when something is coming. Daniel realized that she had been trained to read subtle signs, a skill passed down from generations. Her people had taught her to respect nature, to understand its language, and to use it to survive. He felt both admiration and humility. Here he was, a stranger to this land, yet he had been trusted to protect her until her people arrived. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he was determined to do his best. As the afternoon wore on, they heard faint sounds in the distance. Voices carried on the wind, the occasional drumbeat, and the rhythmic steps of people moving across rocky paths. Daniel held Ayanna close and pointed to the shadows of distant figures approaching through the canyon. She nodded slightly, her eyes narrowing in focus. "They are the chiefs," she whispered.
"And some of the warriors. They will come quickly."
"We must be ready." Daniel's heart pounded. He knew that first impressions would be crucial. If the chief sensed danger or disrespect, the situation could turn hostile. But if he showed honesty, courage, and respect for their customs, perhaps they would see him as an ally rather than a threat. He straightened his posture, took a deep breath, and prepared himself for the encounter. When the figures finally appeared, Daniel was struck by their presence. They were tall, confident, and composed, dressed in traditional clothing that marked their authority. Their eyes scanned the land with experience and wisdom, taking in every detail as they approached. Ayanna ran forward to meet them, her movements graceful and purposeful. Daniel stayed back, allowing her to lead the interaction while he observed quietly. The chief stopped a few steps away, and Ayanna spoke in her language. Daniel could not understand the words, but he could see the respect in her tone, the way she lowered her head slightly and then raised it in confidence. The chiefs listened carefully, nodding occasionally, their expressions serious yet measured. Daniel sensed that they were assessing him, weighing his intentions, and determining whether he could be trusted. For a few tense moments, silence hung in the air. Daniel could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Every gesture, every expression mattered. He kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed but respectful, showing that he meant no harm. Ayanna stood beside him, her presence both reassuring and powerful. Finally, one of the chiefs stepped forward, speaking slowly and deliberately. Though Daniel could not understand the words, the tone was not threatening. It was calm, firm, and authoritative. Ayanna translated some of the conversation for him, explaining that the chiefs were curious about his actions and wanted to know why he had helped her. Daniel spoke honestly, explaining how he had found her trapped, how he had helped her because he could not leave someone in danger, and how he wanted only to ensure her safety until she could return to her community. The chiefs listened carefully, their expressions thoughtful. Daniel could see that they valued honesty, courage, and respect. Ayanna watched him closely, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. She had seen his actions, understood his intentions, and now the chiefs were seeing them as well. Hours seemed to pass as they spoke and assessed each other. Daniel realized that the trust he had built with Ayanna was now being tested in a larger, more important way. The chiefs were deciding whether he could be considered a friend to their community or simply a stranger who had helped by chance. He hoped that his actions, his patience, and his respect would speak louder than words. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon, the chiefs finally signaled that their decision had been made. They would not treat him as an enemy. Instead, they would allow him to remain a trusted ally, someone who could be relied upon to help and respect their people. Daniel felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The tension in the canyon seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Ayanna ran to him, smiling broadly for the first time since the journey had begun. "They trust you," she said, her voice filled with joy and pride. "You have shown courage and honor." Daniel smiled back, feeling a mixture of relief and humility. He realized that this moment, this encounter, had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. It was not just about survival. It was about understanding, respect, and the bonds that form when people act with honesty and courage. As night fell over the canyon, Daniel and Ayanna sat by a small fire, reflecting on the day. The tension had passed, but the lessons remained. He had learned that courage alone was not enough. Trust, patience, and respect were equally important. Ayana had shown him the strength and wisdom of her people, and he had gained a deeper appreciation for the culture and values that had shaped her. The canyon was quiet now, filled only with the gentle sounds of nature. Daniel watched Ayana, who had grown comfortable in her surroundings once more. He understood that this was only the beginning of a long journey, one filled with challenges, learning, and shared experiences. Together, they had faced danger, uncertainty, and scrutiny, and they had emerged stronger and more connected than ever. In that quiet moment, Daniel knew that his life had been changed forever. He had rescued a girl from danger, yes, but he had also discovered a world of courage, wisdom, and trust that would stay with him for the rest of his days. And as he watched the stars appear above the canyon walls, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought him to this place, to this moment, and to the extraordinary bond he shared with Ayana. The morning sunlight spilled over the canyon walls, painting the cliffs with a soft golden glow. Daniel and Ayana had spent a restless night, each thinking about what the day might bring. For Daniel, it was a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Though he had earned Ayana's trust, the real test would come now, when her chiefs arrived fully to meet him face to face and judge whether he could be trusted. Ayana, for her part, was calm but alert. She understood the traditions of her people and knew that these leaders carried the weight of generations in every glance, every word, and every gesture. They made their way to a small plateau that overlooked the canyon floor. It was a flat, open area, with a few scattered rocks for cover, and a clear view of anyone approaching. Ayana's eyes darted back and forth, scanning the horizon. She was quiet, focused, and tense. Daniel followed her lead, careful not to make any sudden movements, knowing that this day could determine the course of their journey, and possibly their lives. It wasn't long before the first signs appeared. Dust rose in the distance, carried by the wind, and the soft rhythmic sound of footsteps reached their ears. Then, from the curve of the canyon path, a group of people emerged. The chiefs were accompanied by several warriors, each moving with purpose, confidence, and authority. They were tall, their expressions serious, their eyes sharp and calculating. Daniel felt a sudden rush of respect mixed with fear. Every instinct in him told him to be cautious, respectful, and honest. Ayana stepped forward, moving with grace and confidence, her head held high. Daniel stayed behind slightly, letting her take the lead. He knew it was her moment, her culture, and her choice. The chiefs stopped a few steps away, forming a semicircle that allowed them to observe both Ayana and Daniel closely. For a tense moment, the air felt heavy, filled with the unspoken questions of authority and trust. Daniel could feel their eyes on him, weighing his every move. One of the eldest chiefs stepped forward, his presence commanding but not threatening. He studied Daniel carefully, observing his posture, his expression, and even the small gestures of his hands. Daniel understood that every detail mattered. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and spoke gently, his voice calm and sincere. "I found Ayana trapped," he said. "She was in danger, and I could not leave her alone. My only goal has been to keep her safe until you arrived." The chief did not speak immediately. Instead, he examined Daniel with a quiet intensity, as if searching for hidden motives. Daniel held his ground, careful not to flinch or appear defensive. He realized that the chief was testing more than words. He was testing character, honesty, and courage. Ayana watched closely, her eyes reflecting both hope and concern. She had seen his actions, his care, and his patience, but now her people would judge him as well. Finally, the chief spoke, his words slow and deliberate. Though Daniel could not understand every phrase, the tone was measured, neither harsh nor approving. He could sense that the chief was asking questions, trying to discern whether Daniel's intentions were pure. Ayana translated some of the conversation, explaining that the chief wanted to know why he had helped her, whether he had any hidden motives, and whether he could be trusted. Daniel answered honestly. "I had no reason to harm her," he said. "I did not know who she was or where she came from. I only knew that she needed help." I wanted to keep her safe and return her to her family. That has always been my goal." The chiefs listened carefully. Daniel could see that they were thoughtful, weighing every word, every expression, and every gesture. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, examining Daniel with curiosity. Then, another spoke quietly to the elder chief. Daniel sensed that they were debating among themselves, deciding what course of action to take. His heart pounded, but he remained calm, knowing that honesty, patience, and respect were his only tools. Ayanna finally spoke to the chiefs, translating Daniel's words and also vouching for him. "He saved me," she said. "He did not hesitate. He showed courage and care. He respected me, and he has protected me every step of the way." The eldest chief studied Daniel once more. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and assessing. Then, slowly, he nodded. Daniel felt a wave of relief, but he knew this was not the end. The chiefs had not yet made their final decision. They were still measuring his character, his intentions, and whether he could truly be trusted as an ally. For what felt like hours, Daniel stood there, remaining calm and respectful. Ayanna remained beside him, providing silent support. The other chiefs and warriors moved around, sometimes speaking softly, sometimes pausing to examine the surrounding terrain, as if testing Daniel's reactions and the authenticity of his words. It was a trial, not of strength or skill, but of integrity and honor. Finally, the chief raised his hand, signaling the end of their deliberation. Daniel felt his heart leap in his chest. The moment had come. The chief's eyes met his directly, piercing but not unkind. Then, with a slow and deliberate gesture, he indicated that Daniel could remain. The decision was clear. Daniel was trusted. He had passed the test of character, courage, and respect. Ayanna ran forward, her face lighting up with relief and joy. She threw her arms around Daniel, hugging him tightly. "They trust you," she exclaimed. "You have shown honor, bravery, and care. You are a friend to us." Daniel smiled, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and humility. He understood the weight of what had happened. This was not just a moment of personal success. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The trust of Ayanna and her chiefs meant that he had been accepted into a world he had never known, a culture rich with wisdom, tradition, and courage. He realized that this encounter had changed his life forever. The chiefs continued to speak among themselves, now in a tone of approval and respect. Ayanna translated some of their words, explaining that they recognized his honesty, his bravery, and his dedication. They had seen how he had treated their daughter with respect and care, and they acknowledged that he had acted with integrity from the very beginning. Daniel listened carefully, humbled by their words. He realized that he had been given a rare opportunity, not only to help someone in need, but also to form a bond with the community that valued courage, honor, and loyalty above all else. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the acceptance but also for the lessons he had learned through this journey. As the sun climbed higher, the chief signaled that it was time to move. Ayanna stayed close to Daniel, guiding him through the paths she knew so well. The chiefs and warriors followed, maintaining a respectful distance but observing closely. Daniel noticed the way they moved with confidence and purpose, each gesture carrying meaning, each glance conveying awareness. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and understanding, a glimpse into a culture built on respect, tradition, and wisdom. Throughout the day, Daniel reflected on how his life had been changed in a matter of hours. The trust he had earned was not just a personal victory. It was a reminder of the importance of honesty, courage, and respect for others. He had entered the canyon as a stranger, uncertain of what he might find, and he was leaving with a profound understanding of friendship, integrity, and human connection. Ayanna, too, seemed transformed. She had regained her confidence and a sense of security, knowing that her protector had been recognized and trusted by her people. Together, they navigated the canyon with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that the challenges they had faced were only the beginning of a journey that would continue to teach them both about trust, courage, and the power of human connection. By the time evening arrived, they had found a safe place to rest for the night. Daniel built a small fire, and Ayanna sat beside him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the flames. "You changed my life," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "And I think you will change many more. The chiefs have shown me that trust and courage can create bonds that last forever." Daniel nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He realized that this journey was about more than just survival or rescue. It was about discovering the values that connect people across different worlds. It was about learning to listen, to respect, and to act with integrity. It was about forming connections that could withstand challenges, danger, and uncertainty. As night fell, Daniel sat by the fire, gazing at the stars above the canyon. The events of the day had left him in awe, filled with gratitude, and deeply reflective. He understood that life could change in a single moment, that a single act of courage could open doors to experiences he had never imagined. And he knew that, from this day forward, his life would carry the lessons of trust, honor, and the extraordinary bond he had formed with Ayanna and her people. The canyon was quiet now, save for the soft crackle of the fire and the gentle rustle of the wind. Daniel felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and judgment, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and forever changed. And as he looked at Ayanna sleeping peacefully beside him, he understood that the greatest adventure was not in the path he had taken, but in the trust, courage, and friendship that had guided him along the way. The morning after the chief's decision, the canyon was calm and quiet. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and the light from the rising sun spilled over the cliffs, illuminating the rocky paths and the gentle valley below.
Daniel woke early as he had the past few days, but this time he felt a sense of peace he had not known before.
The tension of the previous days, the uncertainty of meeting the chiefs, and the fear of what might happen had passed. Now, there was only the quiet, steady rhythm of life in the canyon, and the feeling that something extraordinary had changed his world forever. Ayanna was already awake, sitting near the small fire he had built, her eyes bright and alert. She smiled at him when she saw he was awake, a smile full of gratitude and relief. Daniel returned it, feeling a warmth he could not fully explain. Over the past few days, they had faced danger together, learned to trust one another, and survived challenges that would have been impossible alone. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing hour, and now it felt unbreakable. They shared a simple breakfast together, the sunlight warming their faces and the soft sound of the canyon filling the air. Daniel watched Ayanna as she spoke, her words full of wisdom, even at her young age. She told him more about her people, their traditions, and the ways the chiefs made decisions that affected the entire community. Daniel listened carefully, realizing that he was learning not only about survival and courage, but also about respect, responsibility, and leadership. Every word she spoke seemed to carry the weight of generations, a deep understanding of life, and the lessons her people had learned from the land itself. After breakfast, they began to move through the canyon once more, following paths that led toward the center of Ayanna's community. The chiefs and warriors walked alongside them, respectful yet watchful, their presence both protective and instructive. Daniel paid careful attention to their movements, noticing the subtle gestures that conveyed respect and authority, the way they communicated without words, and the way they observed both him and Ayanna. It was a living lesson in culture, tradition, and leadership, a glimpse into a world he had never known, but had now become a part of. As they traveled, Daniel reflected on everything that had brought him to this point. The chance encounter, the moment he found Ayanna trapped, the long hours of walking and surviving together, and the tense moments with the chiefs, all of it felt like a lifetime compressed into a few days. He realized that courage was not just about physical strength or daring actions. It was also about patience, honesty, and the willingness to respect others, even when they were different. Every decision he had made, every choice to act with care and integrity had led him to this moment. Ayanna noticed his thoughtful expression and spoke softly. "You have changed more than you know," she said. "You have learned about trust, courage, and respect, and you have shown me that the world can be kind even when it seems uncertain." Daniel smiled, touched by her words. "And you have taught me more than I could ever have imagined," he replied. "You have shown me strength, wisdom, and the importance of understanding. I have learned from you every step of the way." As they approached the edge of the community, the village came into view. A small cluster of homes, simple but sturdy, surrounded by open fields and the natural beauty of the land. The people watched them arrive, curious but respectful. Ayana waved to them, and the villagers smiled, recognizing their young members safe and unharmed. Daniel felt a mixture of awe and humility. He had never been part of such a community, yet here he was, welcomed and accepted, not as an outsider, but as someone who had earned their trust through action and respect. The chiefs led Daniel and Ayana to a central area where they would speak once more. The eldest chief stepped forward, his expression serious but kind. Daniel felt a deep respect for the man, understanding that his words carried the weight of generations. The chief spoke slowly, deliberately, and Ayana translated, explaining that the community acknowledged Daniel's courage, his integrity, and his respect for their ways. He had passed the test of character, and his actions had shown that he was worthy of friendship and trust. Daniel felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He realized that this was not just about being accepted. It was about understanding a way of life, forming a bond with a culture, and learning lessons that could never be taught in a classroom or through books. He had been given a rare gift, the chance to connect deeply with people whose lives and values were different from his own, and in doing so, he had discovered something essential about himself.
Over the next few days, Daniel began to learn more about the community.
He watched the chiefs make decisions, observed the way villagers worked together, and participated in small tasks that helped him understand their way of life. Ayana remained by his side, guiding him, teaching him, and showing him the respect and care that had marked their relationship from the beginning. He realized that trust and friendship were built through action, through patience, and through a willingness to understand and respect others. Daniel also learned more about Ayana Desar. She was extraordinary, not only for her courage and intelligence, but also for her kindness, her curiosity, and her ability to see the best in people. She had faced danger and fear, yet she remained resilient, resourceful, and thoughtful. Daniel admired her more with each passing day, recognizing that her strength was not just physical but also emotional and mental. He understood that she had been shaped by her community, her culture, and her experiences, and he felt privileged to witness it firsthand. As the days passed, Daniel reflected on how his life had changed. He had come to the canyon as a traveler, seeking adventure, curiosity, and perhaps a sense of purpose. What he had found was far greater: a deep understanding of human connection, the importance of trust, and the power of courage and respect. He had learned that a single act of kindness could ripple outward, affecting not only the person helped but also entire communities. One evening, as the sun set and the canyon walls glowed with a soft orange light, Daniel and Ayana sat together near the village. The villagers were gathered nearby, sharing stories, laughter, and the simple joys of life. Daniel realized that he had been given more than acceptance. He had been given insight, friendship, and the understanding that courage and honor were timeless values. He looked at Ayana, who was smiling and talking with her friends, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "You have changed my life," Daniel said softly. Ayana looked at him, her eyes shining with understanding. "And you have changed mine," she replied. "We have learned from each other, and our bond is stronger because of it. The world can be difficult, but with trust, courage, and respect, it can also be extraordinary." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that life was a series of moments, some small, some extraordinary, and that each choice, each act of courage, and each expression of respect could shape the path ahead. He had been tested, challenged, and guided, and he had emerged wiser, stronger, and forever changed. In the days that followed, Daniel continued to work alongside the villagers, learning their ways, sharing stories, and participating in their daily lives. He became more than a visitor. He became a friend, an ally, and a witness to a culture rich with tradition, courage, and wisdom. Ayana remained his constant companion, guiding him, teaching him, and reminding him of the lessons they had learned together. As time passed, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The chance encounter in the canyon, the rescue, the long hours of walking and surviving, and the tense moments with the chiefs. Each experience had been a stepping stone, a lesson, and an opportunity to grow. He realized that life was unpredictable, filled with challenges and surprises, but also with moments of connection, trust, and extraordinary beauty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky filled with stars, Daniel sat quietly reflecting on everything he had experienced. He thought about Ayana, her strength, her wisdom, and her courage. He thought about the chiefs, their authority and their fairness. And he thought about himself, the choices he had made, and the lessons he had learned. He understood that his life had been changed in ways he could never have imagined, and that the bond he had formed with Ayana and her community would stay with him forever. The canyon was quiet, filled only with the gentle sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of the stream, and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Daniel felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had found something rare and extraordinary. He had learned that courage, respect, and trust were more powerful than fear or uncertainty, and that a single act of kindness could ripple outward to create connections that last a lifetime. As he watched the stars above, Daniel realized that this journey had been about much more than rescue or survival. It had been about understanding, learning, and growing. It had been about forming a bond that transcended fear, danger, and difference. A bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. And he knew, deep in his heart, that his life would never be the same. The next morning, as the sun rose over the canyon cliffs, Daniel prepared to continue his journey, carrying with him the lessons, memories, and friendships he had gained. Ayana stood beside him smiling, and the chiefs nodded in respect and approval. He understood that the canyon, the village, and the people he had met were now a part of his story, a story of courage, trust, and extraordinary connection. Daniel took a final look at the canyon, feeling gratitude for the journey that had changed his life forever. He had entered as a stranger, and he would leave as a friend, a witness to courage, and a participant in a bond that would last a lifetime. And as he walked forward, guided by the lessons he had learned and the friendships he had formed, he knew that life, with all its uncertainties, held endless possibilities for those who acted with honesty, respect, and courage.